And we're back, and it's COMP392, that's advanced graphics for the winter 2016 semester, and it's week 8, part 1 of our broadcast. I want to go over the assignment 3 details a little bit more closely with you guys, just so that we know what's due this week, right? Because that's one part of our assignment number 3 is due this week. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to bring up the assignment 3 details that I gave you guys last week, right? So some of you probably have looked into it. Some people probably didn't touch it, right? Because inundated over the weekend with stuff, assignments, exams. There's 3. This is a 3-parter. So the first part, your game plan. Some people call it a game plan too. Here's my game plan. Your game plan or your game design document, which is one of the things you need to have ready. Your GitHub repo, your live link for Azure, all that stuff to get you guys ready is all due this Friday, March 11th, 2016, at midnight, right? And that's week 8, right? So all it is setup. And what you need to know for this one is it can be done with you and a partner or on your own, right? So if you want to work a little bit lighter and do something with a partner this time around, you're perfectly welcome to do so. Some people will choose to work on their own anyway because they don't like working with other people, and that's okay too. I'm not going to force you to work with somebody else. But if you are, I want you to note to kind of indicate when you do your submission on Friday who you're working with. Only one person needs to do a submission. So let's say, for example, partner A and partner B get together. They work on this document. They prepare everything and the live site and everything else. They get a GitHub repo going because you're going to have to get all that going on, right? Where you collaborate with the other person. So a bit of learning there in terms of collaboration if you haven't done that before. And then you put it together, and then you kind of upload to Dropbox. You give me your live link. You give me your GitHub link. You give me your game design document in kind of its initial form. So indicate somewhere in there, here's my partner. I'm working with this person, right? If it's your link, one of you has to submit. That's the only thing. The other person doesn't have to submit. I will take your submission, the one person submission, and use it for the other person as well. This week, it's 5% that's due on Friday, right? So that means this part, this initial part, this getting going part, this game plan, structure, and everything else, is worth 1/3 of your whole project. This little project we're doing today. All right. So please don't skimp on this part. This part won't be available. This part won't be available to be done later. You can't just say, "Hey, can I hand in part 1 because I'm done doing part 2?" No. You're going to get marked on part 2 next week. So next week, when the next part's due, it's part 2, right? You're getting marked on part 2. You're not getting marked on part 1. Part 1 ends this week, right? So please don't try and do that. So why am I doing this? Why don't I just make it one big 15% assignment that's due like 3 weeks out, right? Because traditionally, myself and other professors have found that when we do that, you know what? People don't do anything until the last day. 2 days in, you're going to do your assignment. You're going to get together with somebody and brush it, smash it together, and get her done. And this is not one of those kind of assignments. In fact, this course isn't that kind of course. If you do that last minute stuff, you'll get caught, right? And I don't want you to build up that habit for the final project that we're going to have, right? So in order for us to avoid that, this is why I've kind of structured this one this way. So think of it as like 3 little assignments. Even though I've bundled it with one document, it's actually on Dropbox. It is 3 little assignments worth 5% apiece. They're not big. And each one is a milestone, right? Which is, in real life, if we're working together on a project, I would get you on a milestone anyway. You would pound out what it's going to be like. Give me a number of hours that this project would cost, right, in terms of hours. And then one part of it would be your planning phase. So think about phase 1. You're doing your planning phase of your project. I want that first part in by Friday. Okay, what does it include? Your game design document is really the idea of what you're building. Some people have done it before. And my first submission, if you look at the first slot, so assignment 3 part 1, there's actually an extra document in there for people who don't have that external design document. If you've never done it before, if you haven't had COMP397 with me as an example, some people have had it, right? So you have that document already. But if you haven't had that, then I'm giving you a game design document that you can use, right? Just an external document. Or if you're doing game programming 1, you already have a document like this. It's the exact same document, which we'll look at. So what does that look like? I mean, if you look at the game design document, I'm just going to look at that document from COMP397 because that's when I give it to you guys. I think I give it to you like day 2 or something like that. Yeah, here's the external document template. I haven't asked one from this course. I haven't asked for a document yet. It's like the first 2 assignments have been like documentless, right? And the reason for that is because we're still learning all about, 3JS, the environment, the setup, all the tools and everything else. Now you guys kind of have that. So this is what I want you to do. So this document is a template. I want you to replace the stuff that's in the square brackets as well as the square brackets themselves. Please don't leave the square brackets in place. That would be very bad. I get that back sometimes, Square brackets, type the company name here, I get that back, right? That means like make a fake company, make, whatever. Insert a company logo. What does that mean? Well, you're getting paid for this, like I said before. So if you actually go back to the requirements for this thing, a company logo, you're getting half a mark, right? So if you do a company logo, table of contents, version history, all I really want to see here is your commits, your commit history. And you can do a capture for this initial, when you submit this document, external document, game design document the first time, all I want to see is your initial commit and anything else you've done for your, to set up, right? So any other setup commits that you've done, that's in your version history. So you can do a snapshot of your GitHub commits, and that's all I want here, almost like an image. That's all I want. Detailed game description. What's your game about, right? So you're building a game. It's a maze game. What is your game? Your game's going to be probably slightly different than somebody else's. What are you building, right? What are your controls? And from an interface sketch perspective, what I'm looking at is, what does your level look like? Give me a top-down or some kind of side view of what your level is going to look like, right? Because you're going to make your little level, right? And the level has to have a goal, like maybe a door that you get to or something like that, or maybe a trap, kind of an empty floor, someplace you jump off into oblivion, whatever. Someplace that, you end the game. There's going to be your level has to end somehow, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about. Your interface sketch kind of details that. How do we make an interface sketch? Paint is fine, right? You can use Paint. You can use Fireworks. We've done that a couple times. In other courses, you can use Photoshop. You can use some other tools that are online. Mockups is a favorite for some people to use that in other courses that I do. So mockups. For some people, this is review. So please take it as such if you've seen it in other courses already. Please don't get mad at me because I'm showing you again. Mockups is like an online, sketcher. You can kind of sketch out your stuff. So if you ever do your documents here, you can kind of, put stuff in, drag and drop items in here and create a sketch for websites, but it's also really good to draw online if you don't have a program that you want to use. So that's one. You can certainly use that. So, interface sketch. Screen descriptions, this is really around screenshots. And I want 3 screenshots, one for your start state, one for your gameplay state, one for your game end state. In this particular case, you're only going to have one scene, but you're still going to have 3 states, right? Before you start playing, there's going to be a state, like maybe in instructions or whatever. And then there's going to probably be your gameplay. So take a snapshot when you're playing the game, take a snapshot when the game is over, right? It's going to be all in one scene, though, right? What kind of characters or vehicles do you have? Describe it. Your screenshots, by the way, you can't do your screenshots this iteration. So the one for Friday, there's no way. How do you have screenshots? You don't have a game yet, right? So you can't do screenshots yet, right? So please don't include those. And part G would not be due this Friday, right? Of version history, you would have some stuff right now, like your initial version history, your initial commit, any kind of other structural commits that you're going to do for your project. That's the only thing that would be due. But this document that you're going to give me this Friday is a living document. Right, so I want it in its initial state for this Friday in its own Dropbox folders. When I get it, I want to be able to kind of look at the original document you've given me this week, and then what I'm going to get the last week, which is going to be a different document. It's still due. The last week you still have to finish off your external document, and the part that needs to be fixed is things like your version history. That needs to be updated, right? Because obviously things are going to change between now and last week, right? And you're also going to have to give me your kind of some snapshots of your screens. So that's going to have to be done as well. Enemies. There really isn't any enemies for this game other than hazards that are planned. We'll talk about that, like pit traps, some kind of things to jump over, someplace you can fall, things that fall on top of your head. Like those kind of things would be hazards. But there is no enemies. There are no enemies in this particular game. And the reason for that is just no time. We don't have any time for that kind of AI or any kind of fancy movement with enemies. So for this project, there's no enemies required. It's only hazards, okay? So when you put enemies in here, you would describe what kind of hazards you have. Now, if you want to go take it further, right, and you and your partner say, you know what, we can probably get an enemy going, something that chases the player or some kind of, simple pathfinding or whatever, that's up to you. But please don't kill yourself. That's not what's on the docket for this one, right? Scoring we're going to talk about. You need to kind of create a way of displaying your score. There's some different ways of doing this. One way is using just regular HTML. That's kind of overlaid, like an overlay on top of your screen. We can do that. Because remember, what you're really making here is a website, right? At the end of the day, it's still, even though it's an application, web application is still a website, so you still have access to everything else you normally can do. That's one. And also sound, right? I've asked you to put any kind of sound clips, some simple sound clips for movement and stuff like that. If you have anything like that, you would include that in here, right? Any art or multimedia, like if you're gonna use any kind of special textures, which by the way are not required in this particular assignment, there are no textures required. Textures are bonus. I want you to use textures if you can, right? I'll pay you for them again, right? But they're not required. If all you do is make some simple primitives that move around the screen and that's your game, that's cool. Why? Because people are going to say, well, Tom, that's pretty simple, right? I can pop that off in an afternoon. Yeah, okay. Okay. There's other pieces to it, like making sound go, you know, talk about collisions and how they work and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of little details here, and it's going to take us the better part of 3 weeks to build it out with you. So I'm going to show you how I would do it if I was going to do the project step by step starting today, right? But it's not something that you can kind of do. You can't. This is a big elephant or crocodile. I can't use elephant anymore. People tell me don't use elephant. Okay, you know, this is a big crocodile that people you know want to try and eat at once. You can't eat this one at once. This is a big dragon you got to kill step by step, right? First you got to poison the dragon, then you got to, you know, sorry, but there's different ways of doing it, right? You got to weaken them a little bit. And GitHub, this part is also due this week, right? GitHub, notice that inside your GitHub on step B here, it says each team member must contribute equally. So you can't have a guy that like is, you know, is pushing. He or she does all the work, you know, and then the other person doesn't do anything. That would be really bad, right? So if I see this happening within the first week, and by the way, if you've chosen a team member and you want to bail, here's something that happens, right? I work with, you know, you and I are working together, right? And then, you know what? You don't like me after week 1. You realize that when we got together to make the game design document, I suck, right? So what do? Can you, in the middle of your project now, with the way I've outlined it, say, Tom, you know what? I was going to work together with Mike, or as an example, and you know what? I can't work with Mike anymore, right? Is that okay? I'm just making a name up, right? And the answer would be, yeah, you can. You can skip out of it if you don't. Now Mike is responsible for part 2 on his own, right? Why? It gives us more flexibility. Things don't work out. There's no commitment, you know, for you guys to stay together. How about this? Tom, I started working with Mike, but you know what? I like Steve. I want to work with Steven for the second part. Can I do that? You know what? Okay. It's okay. You can switch partners in between your projects, right? Huh? It's Mike guy, right? Who wants to work with Mike? But you know what I'm saying, right? If you don't want to work with the same partner the whole time, right? I'm totally fine with that. Like I'm totally good with that kind of stuff. So go ahead. You can switch partners. Obviously, the easiest thing for everybody would be to stay together with one partner the whole time, especially if you're working on a project together. Otherwise, if you move from one group to another, I mean, this is an American Idol, eh? Like you can't like, you know, do like a, you know, it's not group night or whatever it is, or a group week, right? It's going to be bad. I mean, you have to find something on either you do it on your own, part 2 or whatever, but there's nothing to hold you back. But you need to communicate with me. So if you say, you know, Tom, I was working with Josh, and Josh is a great guy, but you know what? I want to try and go do this on my own, right? Josh is great, but you know, he really pushes me hard. He's a real taskmaster, right? He whips me every time I go work with him, and I can't do it anymore, right? And then, you know, Joshua says, yeah, he's right. You know, I am pretty hard, right? So Tom, you know, can I work on my own for the second part? Yeah, the answer is yeah. Please let me know. Please don't do this last minute. Don't crap out and say, well, you know what, I didn't have anything right. Things didn't work out, and you know what, it was halfway through the week, so I couldn't get it done. I'm not going to accept that. You guys got to figure that out on your own. I'm not making you choose a partner. You're choosing your own partner or working on your own, right? So it's your responsibility how you get this stuff done. Okay. So GitHub is a vital part of that. It's the way you're going to show how things get together, and you need to research a little bit. The question is going to be on your mind, how do I collaborate with somebody else, right? And I've kind of showed this in other classes, but the easy way to look at it is if you go to GitHub, right? So here's this lesson that we're going to use today, by the way. And by the way, when I'm talking, why don't you guys download this little stub that I created, COMP392 lesson 8. That's a stub that I've kind of created for today's class to speed us along, right? So I want to collaborate with somebody else. How do I do it? Well, I go to options or settings here in my GitHub repo. And on the left, it says collaborators and teams, right? So I can assign a collaborator in here, and I have to log in, right? So I have to put in my password. So here I am logged in now, and I can add in, I can create a new team if I want to, or I can add collaborators by their GitHub name. So whatever the GitHub name is, they're there. Once you add the collaborators, you can choose, you know, as an example, what they're working on. They can actually work on your repo, and they can contribute to your repo equally, right? So again, this is a really great thing. Here's the challenge with working together with somebody else. How do you do it, right? I'll answer your question in a second. How do you do it? How do I work with, you know, I'm going to work with somebody else as an example. So me and Joanna decide to work together as an example, right? Because, you know, Joanna's smart, and I want to, you know, kind of learn what she knows. I know my stuff, but she's got her, you know, really cool stuff that she knows, and I want to combine with her and do something, right? So that's great. So, you know, we work together, and I want to collaborate. How do I do it with her? Well, if she's starting it off, right, she's starting the project, she would create the project structure or whatever first, as an example. I'm just giving you an example. This is one way it could be done. Then she's done. I pull her stuff down into my local repo, right? I do my work. Then I push everything else up to the, you know, the remote repo on GitHub. I'm done. She pulls it down, right? That's a way that it could be done. Now, why am I mentioning this way? Is it the best way? Well, there's better ways to do it, right? There's using branches. There's other things to do. You can work in different parts of your GitHub project and so on, and they can merge later on. You can certainly research these other ways. I'm not going to stop you from using different branches and everything else, but the handoff method is the simplest method. I'll tell you right now. So if I hand off to Joshua works on his stuff. He's done. He tells me I'm done. I take it from him, and I work. If we both do a commit at the same time, that's when bad things can happen, right? That's where things, you know, clash, where I merge things in, and like, let's say me and Joshua or me and Stephen are working together as an example, or me and Wendell, whoever I'm working with. Maybe I have a team of 5, and someone does a commit at the same time as I'm doing it, or I've changed some stuff without pulling down, you know, Wendell's changes as an example. That's bad. That'll come into a clash. So always do like a baton. Hand off the baton. Here I'm done. Go ahead. Do your stuff. Pull my stuff down. Okay, you got it? Good. Work. Done. Are you done? Good. I'm going to pull your changes down. Cool. I'm going to work on it. Here's my push. And back and forth. That's the easiest way to do it. Is it the best way to do it? No. There are other ways to do it, but I'm not going to detail that. That's not part of this course. It's out of scope. So please, you can look it up. It's not that difficult to figure out how to work together with other people. There's many other ways to do that, but somehow you got to show some equal commits with you and your partner. Okay, that's what's due this Friday, and that's including the structure of your application that you're building, like your site structure. Obviously, you want to push this right away to Azure. All that kind of stuff is going to be done by Friday. Yeah.
We're working on C9 because it allows for collaboration. We haven't set up to push to GitHub.
Right.
We'll be signed in under one account. If we let you know in advance, that okay if all the commits show up under someone's name because they're.
Oh, if you want to share your, I think there's a way of showing you as a collaborator in C9. Check it out. There's a way of showing different commits from different people if you're collaborating, right? Yeah. Because remember, C9, when you can be working right in, you can do a commit right from C9, right? You're saying sharing an account, almost. That's what you're thinking about. It's almost like sharing an account, right?
No, it's meant for the pushes to GitHub because GitHub you're signed into your GitHub account.
Right.
Generally, one person set up.
Check it out. There's ways of doing it so you don't have to do that, right? So any other questions around this assignment? It's due, this first part 1, is due Friday at midnight. Now, we're sitting on Monday. It's not that difficult to get this stuff done. All you need to do is outline what you're doing. Talk to me about your concept, let's say Wednesday. I want to hear your concept. And I want to talk to me about who you're working with on Wednesday, okay? So there's not going to be a quiz on Wednesday, but I want to know who you're working with, if you're going to work with anybody, right? So say, Tom, I'm working alone. Or Tom, I'm working with so-and-so. And you know what? Here's my concept, high level. Is this okay? If it's okay, you're good to go. And then Friday, you do your submission, and you're done. Then next week, we'll talk about the next piece, okay? Let's talk about that now a little bit, though. Part 2 would be your player movement on a 3D level and some simple game mechanics. Game mechanics include things like simple collisions and those kind of things, right? Moving around, moving with the camera, remember, this game, I've plotted it as first-person perspective, right? First-person perspective, which means your camera is hugging your character, whatever it is, right? What if you wanted to do a third-person perspective? Would I allow that? Absolutely. If you want to make a third-person perspective kind of game, good luck. But it's way harder, right? Please don't go too crazy with this one. Again, this is just a simple assignment. It's not that crazy. We don't have to go nuts here. Keep your project scope low, okay, small. Why? This can really spiral out of control. Once we start adding physics into something, there's complexities around. There's just some research that has to be done, right? I'm letting you work with a partner because of that, because it's more complex than we've ever done anything else so far, right? And you can ask other people who've done COMP397. For the first three assignments that I've done in any other course, I never allow people to collaborate until the project. Not so on this one. This one is more complex. There's some calculations that need to be done. There's some ways to fix things. There's different aspects you got to throw things together to make things all work. Okay? So that's due on next week, not this Friday, but the following Friday, right? That's Friday the 18th. Now, I think that week, Friday the 18th, is we don't have classes that day because that's Good Friday, if I'm not wrong, right? Am I wrong? Or is it the other week? I can't remember which week it is. Maybe it's the 25th. So the 25th, when this thing is due, that's when it's Good Friday, right? So that's the where hazards, scoring systems, and collectible, all that stuff is due on the Friday, on the Good Friday. It's due that day, right? So that's when it's due. So let's talk about that one. So what do I mean by hazards? I mean like things that actually, you know, your whole scoring system, the points, sound, all that kind of stuff is due by the last day. It's not game mechanics. There's no sounds here. Okay, I don't expect sounds to be handed in on part 2. What if you're really ambitious and you say, Tom, you know what? I finished part 3 already. What am I? You know, I'm done. Right? Guys, please make it easy for me to assess you. Right? And what I mean by that is, give me part 2 when I'm asking for part 2. Right? If you're done part 3, put it in the part 3 Dropbox. Right? That's all. Just split it up. So let's do part 1. Here's part 1, Tom. Part 2. Here's part 2 with my game mechanics. Right? Please don't indicate, well, this is my commit that shows my game mechanics working. No. That's not easy for me to download. I'm gonna have to go to that commit, download that commit, do all kinds of stuff. Like, you know, it's gotta be easy for me to see, right? Then part 3 would be your final commit. That's gonna be your final, you know, version that you're gonna hand in. And that's your, you know, everything working, right? With your games, your systems, your collectibles, all that stuff. Okay? We're gonna build this together. I'm not gonna say, hey, here you go, see you later. Right? I don't do that kind of stuff typically, right? There's going to be some pieces I can't get to because I need to describe a bunch of things. This second half of the semester, it's like we're doing a new course, okay, in some ways. Why? Because the first part of the semester is all around basic 3D, basic 3JS, all that kind of stuff. This second half is like the fun and more difficult part, right? So I'm going to treat this like a whole different aspect, a whole different part of the course. Any questions around what you're building for assignment 3? 3D game. What I asked is it's a maze game, right? I said the game must include hazards for the player to avoid. A scoring system must be included. You build your own graphic and sound assets. You must use 3JS and a JavaScript physics engine to build your game. Notice I didn't say Fizzy.js. You could use Canon.js. You could use Ammo.js. You could use another physics engine that better suits your needs. But you need to use 3JS. Please don't use Babylon.js. That would be cheating, all right? So we're going to be talking about, so it says a simple first-person perspective game is what you're going to be building. So your gameplay scene is where the main game occurs. This will include a ground plane with obstacles to navigate around, which means you're making some kind of obstacle course or maze game. That's kind of the name of the game as a basis, right? So please read the requirements, right, of what it looks like. What about if you don't want your character to look up? Right, because one of the challenges that we have with making a mouse look, function is it's hard to make your camera look up without the whole character falling over, weird things, because it's a little bit of this all programming from scratch, right? To me, as long as you can look around with your character, like right and left, I'm okay with that, right? It doesn't have to be full look. Like I'm talking, you don't have to go with constraints up and constraints down. That something we can handle throughout the lessons. You'll see how difficult that is to do, right? Now, I'm also going to require you to, give me some input, eh? Like if you have a different way of doing something, this isn't just a me do, this is a we do, right? Like together, so that we can all learn as we go through this next few weeks, right? Starting today. Okay, so that's really it in a nutshell. You're really going to build this stuff. How about other libraries? What if you want to use Create.js because you want to do your UI with Create.js? Can you do that? Like, for example, your HUD. Can you do that? Can you use a canvas along with WebGL? Yeah, you can, right? Because that's, your web page can do that. There's some complexities around it, be careful, but it can be done, right? What about if I want to use Sound.js from the Create.js library to make it easy for me to use sound? Absolutely, and I'll be doing that. I'll be using Sound.js. I'll be using some textures we're going to render over the next course of days. I'm going to add some textures as well. So we're going to be talking about texture mapping and some other kind of physics, some other kind of concepts we haven't really talked about, although some of you have done it already. And that was evidenced at the exam. Some people add textures to your little tower of power, right? Some people found that exam, easy. Some people found that exam really hard, actually. I had people here to the last minute, right? So, and that's just a matter of practice for some of you. So think about the way you generate health or scoring for this. So a life counter and a health status, the avatar collides with a hazard or falls off the ground plane, you lose a life, and then you get reset, right? So you have to describe how to make all that happen. This part, because we're making a full game for the first time with Three.js, we're going to add a bunch more objects or classes into our library. So this is the first time we're going to actually add a little bit more complexity. We're going to make an application, right? And because of that, please follow along closely, because in a test or a quiz coming up, I may ask you, well, okay, why do we do this? Why do we add a module here? What's this? What am I talking about? What I mean when I talk about this concept or whatever it is, this new aspect to the game. Okay, questions? You guys are all experts on assignment 3. I love it. Okay, let's see if you guys have questions as we go. I know you guys are laughing at me, but you know how it goes. No questions, and then we start doing it, and then you have a ton of questions, right? Okay. Here's a couple of things I want to talk about today. We're going to be using physics to do our stuff. And physics, when I talk about physics, basic physics, I'm talking about simple physics, like, how about the 3 laws, the kind of like the 3 laws of physics? Who knows like the basic laws of physics? Anybody? Come on. It's like way back in the day. We're talking about like high school stuff. There's like 3 laws, What are the 3 laws, basic physics, right? I like that one. So, one of them is, one of the first ones I like to hear is, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object at motion tends to stay at motion, right? So that's one of the first laws of physics that I ever learned, and I'm talking about it because when I say the 3 laws, if I put 3 laws of physics, 3 laws of physics, not robotics, 3 laws of physics, right? Newton's first law of motion: every object in a state of uniform motion tends to remain in the state of motion unless an external force is applied to it. We need to remember that, eh? That's and the 3 laws of motions really apply here. Second law of motion is the relationship between an object's mass, its acceleration, and the applied force, right? And basically what it is as you add force, right, to an object, you can accelerate an object, right? And you can also add force to negatively accelerate an object or decelerate an object. And sometimes we have forces, more than one force on an object that are being applied. For example, in real life, we have gravity. That's a force of gravity pulling us down. But we also have things like friction on the floor so we don't slide and kill ourselves, right? And we have other forces like wind force. And when we're outside, we can feel the force of the wind stopping us from moving at a certain pace. We need to use more energy, right? And it's all around conserving energy, right? So that's kind of law number 2. And the third one is, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which is what you were kind of saying, right? It's almost like forces are paired. There's a pairing of forces, right? I push on something, but it pushes back, right? And the heavier the mass, the larger the mass or more dense the object is, then it's going to push back more on me. So imagine trying to push a car, right? There's a lot of force that's coming back at you because the car doesn't want to move. It's at rest, and it wants to remain at rest, right? So you're trying to push a car, but you can't push it because there's too much friction, and you know what? The car's too massive for your strength, the force that you're applying, right? And that's what it comes down to. So remember that when we do video games, and we make video games, make anything to do with physics simulations, whether you're using it for military applications or medical applications, as an example, it's just pixels, right? So we got to apply this simulation to the game to make it look like, we're simulating physics, but it's not real physics. There is no forces, it's just pixels. So we're assigning an illusion of forces and physics to the game, right? All right, let's talk about this. So how do I add physics? One thing we need to do is, let me take a look at my project. And I've got this basic project here. I'm working with a project called, I don't want to update now. I'm working with a project called COMP392 Lesson 8. It's up on GitHub, on, you know, we're in the Centennial account there. And I have a couple things that I've set up. One thing you need to note is I want to add something called PhysiJS that to simulate physics. That's the physics engine I'm going to be using. So if I go to PhysiJS, this is the one I'm going to be using here, PhysiJS. Now, guys, the documentation we're talking about here on PhysiJS is very low, all right? It's not the same API that I'm used to. Actually, it's very similar to what we see from 3JS, maybe a little bit less, right? Not because 3JS is that bad, but the documentation isn't amazing. One thing is, it's built on top of something called Ammo.js. That's the default one, right? Although there's a Canon.js branch. So if you wanted to use the Canon.js branch of PhysiJS, you can certainly do that. I'm going to be using the standard Ammo.js branch, okay? Ammo.js is very similar to bullet physics that we see in things like Unity and Unreal and other engines. We need a physics engine that adds onto 3JS in order for us to simulate physics. Physics cannot be done with 3JS. 3JS doesn't have a physics engine built in, okay? So we have to add this other plugin. Here's what you can do with it. I'm going to give you some examples. Here's a PhysiJS example. When we have a car, right? So I'm driving a car as an example with the arrow keys, if you want to try this out. One thing that it has built in, PhysiJS has a vehicle, kind of vehicle physics built in. So it kind of does all for you. So if you want to build a vehicle or some kind of objects, you can do that. This is just a website. Notice that there's two stats. There's one for the main website. There's also one for the actual, you know, this part of the website that does physics. Notice that it's still rolling, right? And we have some objects. So that's a little example that we have. Here's a couple other ones, Jenga, right? So I want to pull, you know, this block out of the tower. Let's pull this one out here. You know it's going to fall, and it's going to do as much kind of natural-looking simulation as possible. So it's not bad from a from a 3D perspective. It's pretty good. Notice how my computer is just like firing up its graphic processor, right? I can hear it already. The fan is working on this thing. Because previously, before we had, you know, true WebGL kind of enabled, you know, and using our graphics processors, our hardware, and to use hardware acceleration, we couldn't do this kind of stuff. There would be no way we could do this on a website. Now we're able to do this kind of stuff, but it takes a little bit of power, system power for us to do that. And I mean system CPU utilization, memory, and so on. So that means your you know, frames per second is going to be different. It's going to be depending on what your system is going to be able to do. And I can continue to drag blocks around and fire things off, and, you know, do this kind of stuff with the physics, right? I have that capability. What actually this is doing, and some really good examples here, is using you know, raycasting in order for you to do this kind of stuff. When you click on an object here in 3D space, my mouse is on a 2D plane, right? X and Y. But when I actually click on an object to control it like this, what I'm actually doing is casting a ray. I'm using raycasting to control where my object appears in three-dimensional space, right? And how I cast it away. All right, let's go back. So that's Jenga. Let's do one more. This is kind of an interesting one. We have is random objects that spawn, and you have kind of this bumpy plane, a bump map, a height map, if you will. And what you're doing here is, you know, these objects are falling and they're being affected by the height map of our plane, right? So very interesting example. So they give you some examples. It's not like you don't have enough. And notice how even if they've added 78 shapes, we're getting some pretty good performance for that. Sometimes it drops. Like we're looking at in the 40s and 50s sometimes, depending on how many shapes get on. Notice how it's slowing down now, right? The more shapes you're using. You're going to get that with WebGL because, you know what? At the end of the day, it's still a website. So we have to watch performance, right? It's one thing we have to watch here with the stuff that we're going to be doing today. So PhysiJS is something that we need to do. Now, luckily, what I've done is the code that I've given you. I'm going to stop producing this for a second. The code that I've given you I've already included things like PhysiJS. I've already downloaded for you. So lesson 8 has PhysiJS included, and it also has you know, the stubs that we're going to write today for today's, you know, little classes that we're going to write. Okay, it already has those stubs in place. One of the things that we want to kind of explore is this. If I start my physics simulation, I want to be able to, I want my mouse pointer, right, to kind of be locked, right, so that my mouse disappears. I don't want to see my mouse in the game when I'm playing, when I'm doing a first-person perspective. Now, what we have in place, and this is part of HTML5, one of the HTML5 standards, is something called the pointer lock controls, right? By the way, they also built into 3JS. However, I'm not going to use the pointer lock controls that are built in 3JS. We're going to write our own, right? And I'll talk about why in a second. So what are pointer lock controls? So I go pointer lock controls, right? And that's for, you know, just basic pointer lock controls. Notice that there's one for 3JS, but pointer lock controls is something that's being used by, if I go pointer lock by itself, pointer lock in HTML, right? And it'll take you to Pointer Lock API, which is part of the developer network here at Mozilla, right? This is what's happening here. We're using the pointer lock. And what pointer lock allows us to do is it breaks down into 3 pieces. So here's something new for you to be tested on, right? What is pointer lock, right? It allows you to do 2 things. You can request full screen API, like full screen access, which we're not going to do for this particular example today, right? We're not going to go full screen. But what it allows you to do is locks your pointer so that it only works within the screen, all right? And you can escape from it, from pointer lock, with the escape key. Now, this functionality is not available across all browsers, okay? So if I was to look at this, this is one possibility. And by the way, you don't have to use pointer lock in your game. I'm just giving you this as one thing that we're going to be talking about today. So if I looked at the caniuse.com, here's caniuse.com, and if I put in pointer lock, if I just type in pointer lock, notice that the pointer lock API, right, is only supported by 41% of browsers out there globally, right? Things that don't support it. If you're using IE, the examples I'm going to be doing today will not work. If you're using Safari, it will not work. If you're using iOS Safari, it won't work either. Opera, Android browser, or Chrome, none of that will work. The only time it'll work is in the latest Edge browser, Firefox, and Chrome, and a bit of Opera, right? Now, this is bad, because if I was going to serve this up to as a client, and I said, well, I want everyone to use it, IE has quite a bit of I would say, market share out there, right? So I'm saying, well, even IE 11, it's not going to work for it, right? And I have to, I'm accepting that when I make my changes. But I want to show you pointer lock because it's quickly becoming something that's popular among you know, people. When you click onto the actual, you know, your game, it takes control of your mouse. That's what you're doing. Now you have to give the, you know, your game permission for you to do that. Okay, so pointer lock is something that we're going to be using, and we need to test for pointer lock. We're going to say, well, if pointer lock, if this thing is supported, pointer lock, right? Then I'm going to do something. I'm going to add an event listener for the mouse click event, right? In order for me to you know, to take control of the screen. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing with pointer lock. Okay, so that's what pointer lock is about. Pointer lock, it's just an API that's built in the HTML5 standard that allows me to take control of a user's mouse if they give me permission. If they don't give me permission, can't do it, right? So that's something that you can't control. And with JavaScript, that's one thing that you cannot control is the user's browser, ever. You can never assume that the user is going to have the same browser that you're using or whatever, okay? Okay, so let's talk about how to do that. Pointer lock. The other thing that I'm using with Fizzy.js, right? Fizzy.js uses something called a web worker. Who knows what a web worker is, right? Some people have never worked with a web worker before, so this is kind of an advanced topic for some people, right? Anybody? Web worker? Think about it as another process. If I was to look up web worker, you know what that is. Here on W3 School, it says a web worker is a JavaScript that runs in the background independently of other scripts. Think about this as a coroutine, if you will, if you're using Unity, right? Or something like that, or some kind of additional process that runs in the background. This is what's going to help us create our physical or our simulation, our physics simulation, by running a web worker, right? In order for us to use a web worker in Fizzy.js, well, I've already kind of done that. If I go to the game.ts file, let me show you what that looks like, right? And this is required to use Fizzy.js, right? So I'm going to go to my core file, Go to my game.ts. Underneath that, you see that there's an area that says set up a web worker for PhysiJS. This is what it looks like. I've already set it up for you. All you're doing is you're pointing at something called PhysiJS worker, right? Which is an actual script that PhysiJS provides us to enable or create the web worker. You good?
Yes. Is there like something that you can point to online? Yeah.
For which?
PhysiJS.
Yeah. Oh, you mean what do you mean point online? What do you mean
Like,
point?
Bootstrap. You can point. Let's say you want to use Bootstrap.
Oh, like a CDN?
Yeah.
No. No. That's what I'm telling you. This, unfortunately, it doesn't exist right now. You can set it up on your own. If you want to set up a CDN for yourself on Azure, you could, right? But there isn't anything that exists for them. So there's little two pieces here that's kind of different from that we've ever seen in our code. One of them is this web worker, and the other one is Ammo.js, which is what PhysiJS is based on. So those two libraries, I've kind of set up here on line 35 and 36. I've put them in place for you. Leave them there. Okay, don't touch them. You may move them around. If you're going to change the pathing, that's fine. I've put the path in that works for me. Okay, but leave it. Please don't touch these, or else your physics simulation will never work. Okay, so you need those two things because it's like a coroutine that runs in the background that enables our PhysiJS to work. Otherwise, it's going to be too slow for us. If we're going to try and run a physics simulation at the same time as we were doing other things with 3JS, it's too much. PhysiJS and 3JS work hand in hand, however, right? So they kind of work together, and we have to modify our scene. And one thing I've done already is notice how our scene is already a PhysiJS scene. So we're changing our scene from a 3JS scene to a PhysiJS scene. That's the first thing we need to do. And I've done that here in the import statement on line 6. Okay? So it's still a scene, it's still called a scene, but it's a PhysiJS scene, which means now we can enable physics simulations. Okay? That's number one. Part two, once we enable the scene, here's where our scene gets instantiated as an example. And the renderer, the camera renderer, and the spotlight, all that stuff is in the scene. The only thing we've done different here, and if I was going to run this little file that I've got going on right now, if I'm going to use gulp, and I'm going to run this file, right? Here's what you're going to get right now. So you're going to get this kind of dark screen right here, right? And you're like, hey, how come the screen's so dark? Because there's a screen blocker that I put on, right? There's actually a div, right? Let me explain the application we're working with a second, right? If I was to notice how I can, my mouse pointer looks different. It looks like I can click on it, right? But actually, it's just CSS that's doing that for us, right? Let's take a look. So if I go back to my index.html, notice that I have a div that I've put in here, right? This is right from the documentation. The div has an ID of blocker, right? And underneath the blocker, you have instructions, right? What blocker does, and if I was to look at the CSS for blocker, just so you see why, if I looked at the blocker, it looks like the position is absolute, the width and height are 100%, and I got this dark color right here that takes up the whole back, almost like an overlay. That's what it is, right? So this blocker is overlaying the content, right? And what it does, it looks like the screen is grayed out, all right, until you click on it. But it's just an effect. It's just an illusion. There's really nothing going on here right now, right? I'm not listening for any kind of mouse click or anything like that because we haven't enabled that functionality, right? The first thing we need to do is, like I said, I put that into place so that it looks like that I'm ready to start my game. One thing I've put in there, I put one object in play, and that is a what looks like a plane. But I want to warn you guys that using a regular plane in PhysiJS, just in case you thought that that would be what you were supposed to do, doesn't work properly. So what we're going to be using is a cube that I've squashed, right? So I've created a cube that's 32 by 32 by 1, and I've squashed it so it's very, very, kind of low. So it's actually a rectangular prism that I'm using for a plane. That seems to work best with PhysiJS. Just FYI, right? So it's the first change you're going to see. So that's what you're going to see here. You're going to see this plane, and you're going to see this clickable. What looks like a clickable area. These instructions, again, they're just in the index.html. So if I was going to go to the index.html, here they are, and they're inside this span, right? The span tag for click to play, where I've styled that span tag, and the instructions also has its own styling. So if I was going to go back to the style sheet for this code here. Here are the instructions for the style sheet. Notice that there's browser-specific code, right, for depending on WebKit or Mozilla or whatever, right, from an orientation perspective. It changes the way the color is. The color of the text is white and so on. The text align is center, and the cursor becomes a pointer. That's what I'm doing here with CSS. Okay, so it's basic CSS, nothing too crazy, and this is right from the example code that you would have gotten online if you're going to try and do pointer lock. All right, I'm not using pointer lock from Fizzy.js because there's some problems with it. Just FYI, right? Making my own, and I want to kind of describe how I'm going to do that step by step. So let's test to see if pointer lock is supported on my browser. That's the first thing we need to do. And the first thing to do that is in my game.ts file, I'm going to, in here where it says in my var, I'm going to start declare a variable that's going to test to see if pointer lock exists. I'm going to do that right underneath my scene or above my scene here. I'm going to say var, and I'm going to call this has or have pointer lock. This is my variable. I'm going to call it have pointer lock. I'm going to make it, instead of typing it for a second, I'm going to let TypeScript declare it for me. One of the things I want to look for is, pointer lock element. Let's just watch me when I do this. Pointer lock element in document, right? That's when I start typing. Or, and this is where there's different ones. There's one for Mozilla. There's one for WebKit as well. So I'm going to say, pointer lock element, by the way, is the one that works for Chrome, right? If I go Moz pointer lock element, that's the Mozilla one, pointer lock element. All right, let me just pull this over. So Moz pointer lock element, I could use that, right? That's the second one. In document, I gotta still do that. So basically I'm saying if this exists, right, it's either this one, right? If this exists, you're gonna get this pointer lock element is going to be what this points to. And if I hover over it, notice it's a Boolean. It's a true or false. So that's what this thing is. Our have pointer lock is really a Boolean variable that points to one of these things. I'm going to kind of split this over a couple lines here to make it easier for us to consume, right? So that way you can see it. Or the last one is, what's the other type? Which is WebKit, WebKit pointer lock. Now remember what I said. Some of these aren't supported, right? So if I say, if I detect WebKit pointer lock element, right, it's probably going to be a false in document. Okay, there we go. That's what you have to kind of type. Remember, JavaScript doesn't really care about spacing, but those are the three things you need to check. So now all we're doing here is we're saying, when I start doing this, I could break this up. I could check for this in my initialization, right? Right now I'm doing it up here. Let's do that. Let's initialize my have pointer lock down into my init function. So I've done my blocker. Here's my instructions. I made a reference to my blocker, which is that thing that blocks the screen and makes it look like it's black, right? Here's my instructions. So if I want to access my instructions, and I will, I can turn them off, right? I want to do that with JavaScript here. And I want to also have access to my have pointer lock, right? So I can actually do that down here instead. So instead of me doing it at one step, like up here in when I declare my variables, I want to do it in the other place. So let's say have pointer lock, and I'll do this whole thing, this piece down here. I want to do this here, right? Because that's the right place to do it, right? I'll just make this a Boolean. A have pointer lock is just a Boolean variable that basically is true or false, right? And what I'm going to do here is, check to see if pointer lock is supported. That's what we're doing here. Or if it's there, if it gives us false, right, won't work. It'll say pointer lock is not supported, right? Okay, cool. Well, that's the first piece. Well, now that we've done that, we can say if we have pointer lock, right? If we have pointer lock, that's the next thing we want to kind of do. Before we do anything else, before we set up the camera or the renderer or anything like that, right? We want to check to see if we have pointer lock. Let's try that out. So we'll say if have pointer lock, right? If that's true, then what do I want to do there? Well, I want to set up an event listener, right? I want to set up an event listener, right? Let's set up another variable here. One more thing we need. So have pointer lock is one thing. I also want to declare a variable called element, which I'm going to point to the document body, right? So if I was going to say element is equal to document.body, I want to show you what TypeScript does for me. If I hover over it, it says HTML element, right? That's the kind of element we have. So I'll rename that. I'll say HTML element. That's the type. There's my HTML element. And I want to use that in here. I want inside my my half pointer lock, if it's true, then I want to say something like this. Element is equal to document.body. That's the element that I want to affect. Document.body, the body of my document. There's different parts of my document. There's the head of my document and there's the body of my document, right? That's what this is saying. The body, the document body is inside the body tags. That's what it means. Okay. Now, what I want to do is when I click on the instructions, I'm going to listen for an event listener. When I click on the instructions, I know that I'm ready to play. That's my event listener that I'm going to make, right? That's the trick. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to say, so if pointer lock, I set up my element, and then I just do something like this. Instructions, right? Here's my instructions up here. I make a reference to my instructions. And remember, from an HTML perspective, my instructions is this div that includes the WASD, and it's inside the blocker div, this big, area that's all grayed out, right? So when I click in there, right, then I can start playing. That's what it's going to be doing, right? Let me go back to that. So really what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, instructions dot add event listener, right? And I'm listening for what kind of event? Well, it's going to be a click event, right? So once I do the click event, I want to pull off a anonymous function that I want to do. I'm only going to do this one time. So here's my anonymous function. I'll pull it up for you guys to see. My anonymous function here. And remember, the anonymous functions are written like this. But in TypeScript, what's the other way of writing this code right here? Function, da 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 da. Was that fat arrow? Thank you for remembering. Right. So fat arrow is the way to go. You take this away and you put a fat arrow in its place, which is the TypeScript way of writing it. Right. It's actually more demonstrative than function. It doesn't mean anything. Right. And basically saying this: when I click on my instructions div, I'm going to do something. Right. That's what this is happening. Right? So what am I going to do? Right. I need to do something with my clicking, right? Well, I want to ask the browser if I can get pointer lock, right? So here's where I'm going to start doing this. So I'll say ask the user for pointer lock. That's what I'm kind of doing here, right? So I'm going to say, let's just do this. I'm going to say console.log, just to test this. I'm going to say requesting pointer lock. By the way, there's 3 stages to pointer lock. You request it, you get it, you release it. Those are the 3 stages. When I get pointer lock, I request it first. Do I have it? Yes, cool, I'm in. Now that I'm in, I'm using it, right? That's my second phase. Third phase, I release it, and I release it by the escape key. Okay, so those are the 3 phases of pointer lock. By the way, that's a nice question on a little quiz. 3 phases of pointer lock. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I'll use my element, because remember it points to my document body, right? Dot request, look what it says, request pointer lock. Now this request pointer lock, I'm going to warn you, I'm not using the browser-specific request pointer lock for every different browser here, okay? There is a much larger line, and by the way, it'll error out with TypeScript. TypeScript won't accept it. So because I know that I'm only going to be catering to something like a Chrome or Safari, it's okay. Sorry, Chrome, not Safari. Chrome or Firefox, right? Chances are, I'm going to just use request pointer lock here, right? So if element.request pointer lock, right? And again, what I'm really doing here is I'm saying I can point to, if I wanted to, in here, I can say something like this. I can say is equal to whatever the browser-specific thing is going to be in here. I can ask for a browser-specific way of getting pointer lock. But for us, all we need to do is do one of these, request pointer lock, right? All I'm doing here is I'm using the method that requests pointer lock from my screen. Okay, so that's what this little click event listener does. Okay, now there's a thing that we have to do. Once this is done, right, so we have pointer lock. We have pointer lock, this is the first piece. We request pointer lock here with the click, right? We get it. Okay, now as soon as we get pointer lock, right, I want to listen for my pointer lock to change, right? So when there's going to be a state where I'm going from non-pointer lock to pointer lock, right? And I'm going to listen for that in an event listener. So let's do that. So I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to go document. So we're looking at the document now. Add event listener. and we're looking at the first thing, which is pointer lock change. Pointer lock change, and it's got to be spelled like this, pointer lock change. And then what we're going to do is we're going to point to something I haven't written yet called pointer. We're going to call pointer lock change. That's going to be the event handler that we're going to use. Okay, and we're not going to. We're going to pass in. We can pass in false if you want. False if you want. By the way, if I pass in false or true at the end, what is that really saying? What's that? What's that last piece? Right? Well, the default state is false, right? The default state, but there's two. There's either on the bubbling phase, right? You can of the event handler. That's that you can. If you say if it's the bubbling phase or the other phase, right? The other phase would be true, right? But here we're using just the bubbling phase, so we're okay. We're just going to use false. We don't have to put anything in here. So we're listening for an event listener here for pointer lock. So anytime pointer lock changes, we're going to do something. Now remember, there's one for Mozilla. There's one for WebKit, right? You know, those are the other two that we can test as well. I'm not going to test for it because we can test for those as well. Two other browser-specific changes if you're using Mozilla Firefox. Okay, here's something else. If I go document.add event listener, I'm also going to search for if there's a pointer lock error. What would I do that? Pointer lock error, right? Because I also want to, by the way, this is also going to look at a different thing. So pointer lock, lock. I don't have this yet, but I will put this together. Pointer lock error. All right, so there's two little handles I want to make. One of them is when I click on this thing, I want to say, hey, listen for pointer lock changes, okay? And if there's an error, I want you to listen for that too, some kind of error because of pointer lock. For example, I don't have pointer lock, right? I've tried to get it, and somehow I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I'm not checking for each different kind of browser. There might be a pointer lock error that's generated. I want to be able to handle that error, okay? Okay, so let's do that. So let's set up these event handlers, and then we'll take a short break because that's enough, right? Otherwise, you guys are all going to kill me. This is too much. So I'm going to go back to the bottom here, way at the bottom of our thing, just before our just after our main init function and before our on window resize, or in and abouts there, before our control, somewhere down here, we can add in these two event handlers. Now they're going to look like. We've seen them before, these kind of event handlers. They're not much different than before, right? They're just a function. So we're going to say, so here's our pointer lock event handler, right? So if we have the pointer lock, right? And remember, it's the pointer lock change event handler that we're going to make. So we're going to say function, and we're going to call this thing pointer lock change. The function's going to be called. It's going to be an event type, right? An event type, and we're going to make it a standard event. If I go event, as an example, we're going to see what kind of events there are. If I go look and see what kind of event it is, it's not a mouse event, as an example, right? If I go control space for the types of events that I can get, notice that there are several different kinds of events that I can kind of look at. One of them obviously is a mouse event, right? You want to see down here if there's any kind of other event that makes sense to us, right? HTML. Right, if I look down HTML, notice that there is an HTML pre-element, a picture, a phrase. What if you can't figure out what the event type is, right? Because sometimes we can't. We don't know what it is, or you're not familiar enough with it, or whatever. So I'm gonna look down here to show you. So I'm searching for this pointer event. Is there a pointer lock event? That's here. And notice there's a pointer event. And there's a pointer lock change type event, right? That's the event type that you see here. Okay, I can put that in, but just warning, may not be the right type, pointer lock change, right? Notice that when I hover over, it says cannot find name pointer lock change of the event type because this is the one we've made. This is the same event that we've kind of created. So there is no pointer lock change. Let's leave it as event. It's going to return void for an example. And what we're going to say is this: if my document dot pointer lock element, if my document dot pointer lock element is exactly equal to my element, right, which is the document dot body, if that's the one, we're testing for that because we want to make sure that we're clicking in the right place, right? Then What we want to do here is, and I'm going to put some stuff in here, we want to enable our controls. We don't have these controls yet, but we want to enable our controls here. That's one thing we want to do, right? What else do we want to do here? That's mouse controls and keyboard controls. So that's enable our mouse and keyboard controls. Mouse and keyboard controls. That's what we want to do here, right? So when I click on that, I haven't done that yet, but we're going to do, that's our stub. That's our little pseudocode that we're writing here. So we want to enable our mouse controls. And we also want to change our blocker style display to none, right? Because we want to take away that blocker. So let's do that for now. So we'll say blocker, right? And then again, if you notice that I get style dot display, right? So the display, we're changing our CSS is equal to none. So we're changing our display, the style of our blocker div tag to none, so we're taking it away. Okay, that's if the document.pointer lock element is enabled, right? So that means if pointer lock is good, right? However, there's going to be a case where we press escape and that's gone anymore. So we'll say else. If it's not there, right? We want to say, so again, we want to say we don't have, so disable, we want to disable our mouse and keyboard controls because our game is going to stop, right? Well, eventually we want to kind of pause our game too. Maybe we can try and do that, right? That's one. And we want to put back our blocker style back to this, this way of our, kind of not showing it anymore. So let's try that out. We'll say blocker.style, blocker.style.display. As an example, we want to make it so that it displays. We want to take away that element. We want to take away the display instead of display. We can actually make it display block as well if we wanted to, right? But let's leave it as none. As nothing, we take it away, right? So we remove that option. The other way to do it is there are web-specific ways of doing it. For example, if you're for different browsers, it'll work different ways. So just this alone should disable and enable our blocking style. Let's check this out and see if it works. We need one more to make this thing work. We need another function. So this is our pointer lock error, right? Pointer lock error is the other one we have to do. This is pointer lock change. Pointer lock change. Now this is our pointer lock error down here. We need that too. And that's another event handler that we need to be able to handle any kind of errors, right? Okay, so for now, we're just going to make a little stub, and we're going to say something like this. We're going to say function pointer lock error, right? That's what we're going to call it. It's an event type function that's going to return void, right? What we're going to do here is we're going to say, well, if there's an error somehow, something that we've done to make an error, then we want to do is we want to basically put our instructions back. So we'll say instructions, as an example, style.display. We're going to put them back, right? And we can also see some other things, like, maybe some in the console, we'll say something like console.log pointer lock error detected, right? Because maybe we don't have pointer lock somehow. Maybe someone's trying to, pass this thing out to someone else who doesn't have it. All right, so cool. Notice now we don't have any errors, right? Now I'm running gulp, so it's already transpiled, right? It's already done that transpilation piece, right? I don't have any more semantic errors anymore, right? So if I was to check my website, it's already refreshed, but let's refresh it again. If I click this now, it should go away and give me this view. Now notice how it says, localhost has disabled your mouse. Did it ask me for access? No, but I've given access before, right? Try it again, try it for you. If I press escape, it takes me out. If I click to play, it's in, and it brightens the screen again. It's an illusion, right? This brightening and dimming, remember, all I'm doing is I have a div tag that's dark, that's overlaid on top of my screen, and all I'm doing is showing the div tag with a dark background and taking it away. That's all I'm doing, okay? Questions so far? Does it work for everybody? It's not work for you, right? Let me update GitHub to see if you've got what I've got, right? Remember, I'm using Chrome. What are you using? Let's see if it's something that works for you, right? So I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to notice I'm not getting any errors. I've got these three things. Someone's sick, and I'm going to say added simple pointer lock control. So I'm going to push my changes. So you should have my changes up there in a second. So check your code with mine, please, because this should work. If it works for me with my Chrome, it should work for you, theoretically. If it doesn't, you need to use a specific version to detect if pointer lock works for your browser, right? Remember that all we're doing, I've only added 2 event listeners for this, right? One of them is pointer lock change and pointer lock error. And if I was going to look up the different ones for different events for browser-specific pointer lock, browser-specific JavaScript, right, for pointer lock, if I was going to look that up, right? If I go to it takes me back to my pointer lock API, but it also takes me back, interestingly enough, to the HTML rocks tutorials for pointer lock, which is kind of cool. Here's a really cool tutorial this dude wrote. This is back in 2012, right? What he does is he actually explains pointer lock nicely. Here's this these 3 states. By the way, this is written almost identical every time I've seen it, right? Notice how here what he's doing is he's saying element.mozilla request pointer lock or element.webkit request pointer lock or and if you set your pointer lock type, this is the pointer lock type, to the different pointer locks that are available, right? Depending on the browser that you're using. I'm using Chrome, so it should work off the cuff, right? It won't work on Mozilla unless you use these 2, unless you use Mozilla request pointer lock. Let's make those changes, right? So here's my element request pointer lock right from here. I'm going to take this element request pointer lock right from this dude's website, right? And I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to my code, right? Where I said this part, this element request pointer lock over here, right? So I'm going to leave this here, but what I'm doing up here, right, is I'm adding browser-specific code for pointer lock. Let me put that in and just refresh. Refresh the scene here. Notice that I'm getting these errors, right? Where element.moz request pointer lock, right? It says does not exist on the type of HTML element, right? This is why I've omitted it. Not because it doesn't work. If you actually put this into JavaScript, it would work fine, but TypeScript doesn't like it, right? And the reason why is because it's not common. TypeScript doesn't handle every single thing. It's not meant for it, right? So this piece of code won't work with TypeScript. It'll give you an error. And there's, of course, ways to ignore it, right? Because it doesn't understand what element request pointer lock means. So therefore, and the way to get around this, just FYI, because it doesn't understand HTML element is the type, right? So for me to avoid it, how do I fix this? What's the workaround? Anybody? There's a really simple workaround for this. Up here, right, where I declared my element, right, I declared it as an HTML element, which is true, right? But unfortunately for this case, it doesn't make any sense. So I would change this to any, which I cringe. It's cringeworthy for me, right? But I could do this. I could change to any. And once I change this to any, go back down here, you can see that this pointer lock check, right, is now gone. Right, let me check it out here. Where did I put it? I probably right at the top. Here it is. See, there's no more error. But that means that this element is an any type element, right? Because we don't know what this element request pointer lock is. There is no request pointer lock standard on the HTML element type, right? So it may be something else. There might be some other kind of element that we're looking at. But it can't be an HTML element, unfortunately, right? So again, TypeScript doesn't know about this. That's the one change you need to make if you're going to test for everything. The other one is, so this is the first piece, element dot, the pointer lock. The other one is I need to request it. So document.exit pointer lock. I need to be able to do this document.exit pointer lock at some point. By the way, I haven't done it. I haven't done it yet. I need to remember there's 3 states. I need to enter it. I need to ask for it. I need to enter it. I need to exit it, right? So I need to figure out how to exit pointer lock. And there's a bunch of different listeners, right? We did this too. Document, add event listener. We did this pointer lock change, but we didn't do these other ones, right? These Moz pointer lock change or the WebKit pointer lock change. Let me grab these 2 things too, and I'll put them in. Okay, so I'm going to go back to these ones here for Moz pointer lock change. Right, so I'm going to put these in there as well. and just format my code. And the change callback in our case is called pointer lock change. I'll put those in. And I'm going to take away my false because, again, it's just bubbling, so I don't care about any other kind of event. Now I've expanded my browsers to include checks from Mozilla Firefox and WebKit. WebKit going to work? We'll see. All right, so that's the second one. So these are my event listers. I need to do the same thing for my errors, though. I have my pointer lock error, but I haven't checked for these two types, so I'm going to add those two in there as well. So I'm going to say, instead of pointer lock change, it's going to be for the error types, right? I need to do the same thing, and it's just Moz and WebKit in front of pointer lock. In fact, let me just confirm in my notes if that's the case, and I think it is. I know it sounds crazy, but I want you to see this stuff because if you want to make pointer lock work, it's kind of neat what it can do for you. But it's also a pain in the ass sometimes. So let me copy this thing 3 times. So I'll say 1, 2, 3. Notice that it's all pointing at the same event handler because it's just mobile or browser specific. So there's Moz pointer lock and there's WebKit pointer lock error, right? They're the same, just with Moz or WebKit as a prefix, right? So browser specific prefix that's in front of there. At the same time, if you want to be really specific from a browser perspective, if we're doing that, then we might as well do my blocker display style down here a little bit different too. Also won't work. That's another thing that's going to cause our errors, right? So down in when I do my on pointer lock change, which is this one, pointer lock change, right? I want to put in some browser specific stuff to take away my, if there's a problem, when I take away stuff, I want to take it away here. By the way, this is a great place in this else statement. Here's where I take pointer lock away. Let me show you this. I'm going to say console.log, pointer lock disabled. Let's put that in there so you can see what happens when that is called. And then I'm going to say, instead of just putting none, right, for my in my else statement here, right? So I'm going to say else, blocker style display is nothing, right? And that's one thing I could put in, but really what I really want to put in, instead of blocker style display, I want to put my instructions, so they go away. Instruction style display, that's equal to none. And in here, what I want to do is I want to take one of my blocker, but I want to take it away with browser specific style, right? So I'm going to say style dot display, as an example, is equal to, and this is where you get the browser prefixes, so WebKit box, and then blocker style display is equal to moz.box. I want to use the box style, so blocker style display is equal to box, the default style. We're going to do that a little bit different. If I can spell display differently. There we go. So that should take care of it more for you than we had before. Let's check and see if that's true. All right, so that will replace. That's the display. We're adding to we're changing the display to whatever it is.
So if it's let's say WebKit style,
it'll check to see if it's WebKit, and if it is, then it'll replace it with WebKit. It'll add all these 3 styles in there. These 3 styles will be added, right? And we can remove them afterwards, like when we do this thing here, we remove them all. One single statement wipes them all out, right? It adds each one of them, yeah. But it also replaces what's there. So if there's actually something else there, it'll replace what's there. If there's also a display property, replace what's already there. Right? It won't just add to it. Because if it was display block and then I went to display none, right? It can't both be there, right? Unless you see them in the CSS order, cascading order, right? Because that means the next, it'll be the last command I'm giving, which is the last part of the cascade, which is my command, right? It'll say box, yeah. In this particular case, it will, because we haven't disabled it up. We haven't enabled it back here. It'll always say box. But once we run this thing, it'll say box forever, right? All right, let's check this out and see what it does for us, because this is obviously incomplete, right? And let's go back to the code, and then we'll take a short break. All right. So if I go back to my code to check it out, notice that I'm back to here. If I press click, it still works. It still has asked me. I'm going to press, if I press escape, I'm back to here. Let me look at my inspector and see what I get. Notice how in my console, it says pointer lock disabled. Let's see that enable and disable. So I click onto it, pointer lock requesting. I press escape, pointer lock disabled. So when I press escape, it disables pointer lock. But I haven't really disabled pointer lock, right? I need to remove pointer lock now in order for me to do this properly, right? So be careful when we do this, when I enable and disable pointer lock, right? So remember, there's that other piece that we haven't taken care of. We've done this piece, but we haven't done the removal. We have to unlock or unhook our stuff from our change, right? So we've added the event listener, and then we're down in here, and it says pointer lock element, requested element, and we've moved it, we've changed it, but we need to take it back. We need to release it somehow, right? So how do I release pointer lock? Well, it's right here, exit pointer lock, right? And it's going to be these three styles again, right? So we're document.exit pointer lock. This is where we want to formally ask the browser to release it, and we formally ask the browser to take it, okay? Now, be careful. We have to do this in the right order because element.request pointer lock is here, right? When do I release it officially? Let me go back and check this out. So here on the top, I request pointer lock, right? Here's pointer lock. If I have it, I request it. Here's where I request it. I'm never going to go back here again, right? Be careful, right? Because if I take it away, can't ever get it back, right? If I do it anywhere else, right? So what would be the right place to do that? I'm just putting it out there for you guys so you can think about it, right? If I take it away, if I go in here and take it away, here's where I request it, and this only happens once. This only happens upon initialization, right? Once I'm done initialization, I'm never going to go back and request it again, right? So be careful. Where do we put that in? How do I take it away when I'm done with it, right? I got to be sure that I'm done. Like I'm done playing, right? So a good time to take pointer lock away is when your game is over, right? When you want to reset, when you have a button to say restart, right? That's a good time. I wouldn't do that here. If I do that here, I'll never be able to get pointer lock back because it's in my if statement. It's inside my init, unless I reposition my have pointer lock somewhere else, okay? That's it for this piece. Does everyone have pointer lock working? So I still see some people who don't have pointer lock. It's working on Chrome, but not on Mozilla, right? And again, it's finicky that way, which means you may choose to use it or not. I'm going to use it here. Your use, optional. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. You don't need it, right? I'm making it useful so that it looks like you're entering the game, right? That's all I'm doing. Okay. Let's pause here, and when we come back, we'll get into how to actually add a simple physics simulation.